Hello, everyone. Once again, Susan Riggs and I are here today with Engaging with the Messy World. Morning, Susan.
Hey,
I'm Donna Chacko, and I'm here with Serenity and Health and trying to think of things related to mind, body, spirit that will bring health to us. And this 10-part series is one of those steps, and it's all because of Susan's wonderful input. She's a long friend and prayer partner and integral coach and wise woman, and has a lot of experience with coaching and has a way of explaining challenging concepts that I think are understandable and practical, which is what we all need. What does this mean to us today, tomorrow? So with that, Susan, I'm going to let you introduce our topic and go for it.
all right. Today's topic is experiencing the world as an ally. And this is about the fact that life comes at us with lots of problems, struggles, difficult people. And as we've talked about before, we don't get to pick what comes at us, but we can choose how we respond to it. So the skill that we're talking about today is another one from the 15 Commitments of Conscious Leadership, which is one of my favorite books. It's commitment number 13. I commit to seeing all people and circumstances as allies that are perfectly suited to help me learn the most important things for my growth. So, for example, when I feel fear about wildfires and heat waves, which are really scary things that are happening, it can seem really strange at first to think about these dire situations as learning opportunities or allies. And we're not trying to minimize them. We're not trying to artificially turn it into a positive. The dangers and the suffering are real. And at the same time, it's true that I can learn something from the situation. I can learn how to better handle my fears. I can learn about effective actions to take in the world. And we'll talk more about both of these paths in a minute. Um, but I think it's important to say up front, most of us don't like the problems that come at us. I certainly don't like having problems.
Amen.
Yes. And we definitely don't think of them as allies usually. But I suspect that most of us can think of at least a few examples when something difficult happened that turned out to give us some really valuable learning, especially in relationships where we're apt to blame the difficulties on the other person. It's their fault because they're being so stubborn or whatever they're being. Um, but in reality, in all relationships, there's always something I can learn about my own feelings and behaviors. So here's an example. Many years ago, I had a coworker who was very difficult for me. I felt like she was a bully, not supportive at all, very reactive. And I actually had to work with a therapist and pay my own money for the therapist to be able to work with this person. It was quite difficult. And obviously, changing my coworker was not an option. I didn't have that power. So I had to work on myself with the therapist's help. And the therapist helped me learn about my reactions to certain personality types, people with a big energy and a very direct way of speaking. Some people deal with that easily. I did not. It's hard for me. It's scary type for me. And so the therapist helped me see my own blind spots and see how to manage my own responses better so that I was able to bring more strength, clarity, boundaries, and respect to this relationship. So my coworker didn't change. I changed, and it became a much better relationship with more motivation and really a pretty functioning work relationship by the time we were done. Um, so to this day, I think both this coworker and the organization would have benefited from her growth. She could stand to change some stuff, but that wasn't up to me.
Yeah.
And so I just worked on my own part, and it turned out to be extremely useful later on because the next 6 or 10 or 15 people I ran into who had that high energy personality, I had better skills for dealing with it, and I've really improved a lot of relationships as a result.
that is really a good story. I have the feeling, Susan, a lot of people might identify that with that in some way or another. Um, with regard to that, a little slightly different slant, let me ask you a question on this ally thing. So I've had the experience, particularly with very close relationships, people I love, where I find out that I have deeply hurt or angered them. And the in circumstances where I don't understand how what I did hurt or angered them. And I'm just curious how that kind of, difficult interaction, which I don't think I'm alone in having those kinds of experiences. How can I turn that into an ally? How can we who have those experiences turn that into an ally?
Those are painful situations and it's deep work. There's nothing easy about this, but it's also very, very rewarding work. And sometimes, to be honest, it requires a therapist. It's not something that people can necessarily do on their own with just some books and videos for guidance. Um, but there are perspectives that you can get by stepping back and leaning on someone else's wisdom, like a therapist. And the very first piece of that is I question the story that you caused their hurt and anger. So the person is hurt and angry. They're feeling hurt and anger. That's a fact. But did you cause it? That's a narrative. And making that distinction is a great place to start. And then there's a simple rule that I think we mentioned in one of the earlier videos, which I call the 90-10 rule. When two people are in a relationship and one of them gets really intensely upset about something the other one did, there's a very good chance that the problem is 10% the result of what the one person did, and 90% the result of the internal world, stories, old hurts, traumas of the person who is reacting. So the intensity is a red flag to say, this is work that the person reacting needs to do. And if I did something that was wrong, I will apologize, I'll fix it, but I'm not going to take responsibility for how hurt they are, because that's their 90%.
Yeah, of course, making those judgments about the percentages is always challenging. But then again, say it's my 10%, even my 10% may be a whole lot of work for me to do on myself. That might make a huge difference in future relationships. It's an interesting, challenging concept, this 90-10 thing.
It is. And it's usually not useful to say to somebody, well, that's your 90%. It is useful if I'm the one reacting. It's useful for me to say, oh, wait a minute, this is a really intense reaction. I can still ask the other person to apologize for what they did that if it was legitimately wrong. But I'm not going to ask them to take responsibility for how charged I am. I'm going to say, I'm more upset than this situation warrants. I'm going to work on that.
Yeah.
So it's a
All
more
right.
internal thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's complicated. All right. So it's also important to note here that this concept of taking things as allies can be misused. It can be used to victim blame, and we don't ever want to do that. I don't tell someone who's suffering that their suffering is a blessing in disguise, or that they caused it, or that everything happens for a reason. Everything happens for a reason is a phrase that some people find comforting, and that's fine if they want to use it. But I don't say it to people because sometimes it can come across as very hurtful, as it minimizes their suffering or dismisses it or blames them. So when I'm listening to someone's struggles, I try to just listen deeply and acknowledge their pain. Um, that's the first and often the only thing that is useful to people. So moving from the pain to the learning is not something we can necessarily push other people to do. It's something we can do for ourselves. So whoever is listening to this, you can use your struggles as a learning experience for you. But I don't recommend pointing other people at this and telling them to look for the learning in it. because they have to get there on their own, and it will tend to cause a lot of resentment unless they're truly asking for advice about what they need to learn.
That sounds wise.
So, coming back to the question of big world issues, the same principle of pain and learning applies. Um, Two things can be true at the same time. The world has a lot of suffering. There's war, there's genocide, there's oppression, there's climate change, there's mass shootings and poverty, and people suffering terrible things. And those are real. And we're not trying to make them into a positive. And at the same time, without minimizing the suffering, we can look for the learning. And I've learned a lot myself in the last 10 or 15 years about things I can do in response to these painful situations. I've learned about understanding systems. I've learned about building community, um, finding like-minded people to work with, and providing mutual support, um, finding projects to work on that make a difference, even in a very small local way. Um, so none of us can fix the world's problems on our own, but we all have our piece to contribute if we can stop complaining and stop feeling helpless and start learning. So one of my favorite quotes about the messy world is from Joan Baez. She said, "Action is the antidote to despair." So when the world starts to feel overwhelming, we need to find something to do, which may be external or it may be internal. Maybe I need to write to my member of Congress or plant a garden of native plants. Or I may need to do some internal work. I may need to spend some more time with a therapist and work on understanding my old hurts and my traumas and my reactions.
Right.
So either of those is a good set of actions.
You've heard me speak many times about what, in that context, I would say would be my action as an antidote to despair, which is my centering prayer practice and trying to introduce that prayer to others to help us find the peace that's in us, to find, that divine spark of peace that's deep in us, sometimes so buried we don't even know. And it's interesting how much, I guess I would say, peace just taking that action has given me. It's like, well, that's something. That is, if I feel very sad about the world or concerned or worried, at least that's something. That's my
It,
step.
it really is, and it's a very important one. There's a saying that meditation teachers sometimes pull out about the state of the world. They say the world is very difficult. Don't just do something, sit there.
Yeah. Yeah, right. Yeah, that's good.
Yeah. Um, so at the very least, one of the actions we can do is to be kind to the people around us, to ourselves, to the world. Sometimes kindness is a world-changing move. And speaking of moves, I want to show a physical move that can sometimes help people get out of a stuck place. So we can actually stand. I'm going to stand over here. If I find myself complaining about a problem and feeling stuck in it, I pick a spot in the room and I will stand there and complain for a little bit. This coworker is so difficult and she doesn't understand and she has no empathy. And having done that for a little bit, I'm going to take a step to a different place and face in a different direction and see if I can see something differently. I wonder what kind of pressures this coworker is under. I wonder how she experiences me and my stressed state. I wonder what it's like for her. I wonder how I can find ways to be calm and professional and direct and build a better relationship of trust. So sometimes just moving can help us break out of a stuck place. I think that's a really cool tool.
That's interesting. That's interesting. Maybe I'll get bold and try that.
Yes.
I
All
shouldn't
right.
say bold. I should say get open-minded, right?
Yes, yes. Be curious. It's always
Yes, be
better to be
curious.
curious. So I want to finish up by saying that not everybody's going to buy into this idea of allies, and you don't have to buy into it, but I invite you to try it out. Just take it as a hypothesis. So if I'm in a difficult situation and I don't like it and I don't believe it's an ally, you just ask the question, if this were an ally, what might it have to teach me? Because we can probably identify the lesson and then just wrestle with that as we're able to let go of being right and mad about the situation. So it's worth trying on just to see what happens, see what might shift.
Yeah, Susan, I mean, it makes so much sense. I mean, if we look at the world as our ally, things will be a lot better than if we, look at every difficult event as a chance to fight and win and beat and conquer. It doesn't usually turn out too well. Such a great topic, such a great topic. Thank you so much once again. So, for anybody who's listening or seeing this, the 10 sessions, well, 9 so far, are available on my website, which is serenityandhealth.com. They're available on YouTube, and you can get the information also through Susan's website, which is rigsintegralcoaching.org. And both of us would love to hear from you with any comments or disagreements, whatever, on things that we have said. The show notes will have the references and a very concise summary. So that's what we have for you today. Happy end of summer as we're getting closer to that point. And I hope you all have a great day. Thank you, Susan.
Thank you.
Okay.